Hey guys, it's Nature Nate. Before we start the episode, just wanted to say I hope you're all well, hope you're safe. We wanted to share a little bit more about our sponsor who's trying to help the world right now with their work. This pandemic has affected everyone. To get through this, we all need to work together. Cypress River Advisors, with their deep cross-border sourcing and manufacturing knowledge, are providing PPEs for free to medical professionals and communities in need. They're providing protective equipment in New York, California, Michigan, and Japan. They're also providing data visualizations to help make policymakers and the public understand the real impacts of the pandemic. For more information, go to cypressriveradvisors.com/COVID-19. All right, now on to the episode. Hi, do you eat food? Did you have any fruits and veggies today? Well, don't worry, there's a systemic reason why you didn't.
Most of us are putting the onus on individuals, but I really want to say that a lot of the reason that we eat what we eat is because of policy.
My conversation today is with Lydia Zepeda, who is Professor Emerita at University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's a consumer science researcher who has worked with the Food and Agriculture Organization, a Fulbright scholar, a professor. She has a super distinguished career and a very long CV. But the main point is that she researches food labeling, food systems, and the rights of migrants. Lydia stood out to me at AAAS because her session was all about how food companies are misleading consumers. Of course, we wanted to have her on Waste Not, Why Not to talk about how food companies are not saving the environment. Our conversation begins with climate-safe diets before we venture into food systems and obesity and how brands deceive us with greenwashing, or in this case, food washing. We cover certification and labeling, organic food and food waste, and so much more. We talk a lot about food and everything you did and didn't want to know about it. Also, stay to the end. We have a question about food waste from the audience. Trust me, you're going to want to hear the answer. Okay. Play the tape. Hi, I'm Nature Nate, and this is Waste Not, Why Not, a podcast on sustainability and how not to save the environment. I'm an environmental researcher based in Taiwan, focusing on ocean, energy, and waste. We are here today at the AAAS SciMic studio, presented by This Study Shows, a Wiley podcast. And I'm here today with Lydia Zepeda. How are you doing?
I'm
Lydia?
doing great.
Doing great?
Yeah.
So to get started, give me some background. You do research on food production. That's
Food
right.
production, food consumption, food distribution, and food waste. Yeah.
So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we begin, let's talk about why you're at AAAS. So to get up to this stage, you had to go up 3 escalators. What's your escalator pitch to someone for why you're at AAAS this year?
Well, I'm here because I really wanted to talk about a diet for a sick, hot planet. And I wanted to talk about how most of us are putting the onus on individuals, but I really want to say that a lot of the reason that we eat what we eat is because of policy and what we're offered.
What's one important detail you'd want just the mainstream public to understand about food?
Well, that our food system is largely failing us. It's failing us in terms of our health. It's failing us in terms of our environment. And it's not our fault. In many cases, it's actually the policies that we have. So we really need to change our food system and our food environment if we want people to make healthy choices and choices that are good for the environment as well.
When did you come to this sort of conclusion in your career? Was this more recent, or have you kind of always known that there were systemic challenges with the food system?
Well, I was an economist in Rome, and I think it's been gradual over time. It's like sort of the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, and the more you realize that there's a lot that people don't know, but you also realize that there's a lot of problems with our food system and the way that we've set things up. I mean, it was sort of an epiphany to me when I was working at FAO that they counted farmers in Africa using only men. And in Africa, most of the farmers are actually women. So that seemed like a glaring error.
That seems like a problem.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't discount women.
Yeah. This was a while ago. I think they've changed it since, though.
Okay, that's good, I guess.
Yeah.
So we talked about systemic problems, systematic problems. What's one of the main drivers of this?
Well, there's a lot of money to be made from selling us food that's unhealthy. So, for example, in the U.S., I know that you have a global audience, but in the U.S., about 69% of the food that we eat at home is super processed food, things that are like soda and candy and convenience food. This food is not healthy for us, but 69%. That's a lot.
69% of the food that Americans consume is just soda and candy. And when you say processed, you just
super processed.
Okay.
So it includes things like soda and candy, but also like prepared foods.
Okay, like microwave dinners.
Yeah.
Okay.
So highly processed food. And this has been linked with cardiovascular disease, and it's been linked with type 2 diabetes and a lot of health problems. So in the U.S., food-related illness is one of the leading cause of deaths. And as you said earlier, 1 in 5 globally. So
is there a response? Is there like a positive response from government or NGOs? Or what are people trying to do to kind of undo this problem?
Well, I think, for example, we recognize some of the effects, like the obesity crisis, the overweight crisis. So in the U.S., I think it's 71% of Americans are either overweight or obese. That means that most people are. It's an exception not to be. So that also is a problem because it means it's normal. But the question I have to ask people is, if everybody is making bad choices, what does that mean? It means we have systemic problems, right?
Right, because even if you're one person, you could undo that, but you'd be fighting this societal inertia, right? Where if your whole family is eating candy, is eating microwave dinners, then it's going to be difficult to work against that and make good choices.
Yeah.
What are some other things that prevent people from making good choices? Is this like an access issue with good food? Is it hard to find good food?
Well, it depends where you shop. So, for example, if you're getting your food from a fresh market, and I know fresh markets these days are are a little scary because of coronavirus, but if you're getting fresh food and you're buying food daily, and if you're eating a traditional diet, you're probably getting pretty healthy food. But if you're getting a lot of processed food and eating a lot of meat, you're probably not getting a diet that's going to be healthy for you in terms of long-term health, and it's not going to be healthy for the planet. So, for example, there was a study that was done in 10 countries, and they found that 41% of the shelf space in grocery stores is dedicated to soda and junk food alone.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of real estate just for sugar water.
Yeah.
And sugar, hardened sugar.
Yeah.
Just sugar.
Yeah. So if you're dedicating a lot of your space to buy things, people are going to buy them, right?
Right. What you see is what you get.
Yeah. When you think about, say, any other kind of addiction, what's the first thing you do? So you remove the person from the environment. Well, how do you remove someone from the food environment? We got to eat.
I mean, you could live in the mountains and kind of become a hermit, but probably has other issues.
Yeah.
Logistical challenges.
Yeah. And then you might starve to death, right?
So you mentioned like a climate diet, a healthy diet. Well, what would a healthy diet look like besides wet market? Like, what could an American do to have a healthy diet?
Well, a lot more plant-based protein. I'm not saying that people should become vegans or vegetarians, but they should just restrict how much animal products that they eat, because they're the ones that are linked to a lot of not just food-related illnesses, but cardiovascular disease, certain types of cancers and other things. But they're also linked to a lot of embedded carbon because they're processing food in order to create their own body mass.
Right, we have to raise a living being,
right.
Handle its bathroom breaks, handle its food, and then ultimately kill it and then eat it.
You're right. So it's going to take a lot more carbon to make a calorie or to make protein through animals. So if everybody just is vegetarian for one day a week, that makes a huge impact.
So Meatless Mondays do matter, actually.
They do.
Okay.
Yeah, they do.
I think we can all do that. I think we can all cut down a little bit on meat at least.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of meat alternatives that people should be aware of? I've heard kind of maybe this myth that soy is kind of bad for you if you eat too much.
Well, I mean, certainly anything's bad for you if you eat too much, but certainly there's a lot of different plant-based proteins you can have. You could have soy, you can have lentils, you can have all kinds of pulses, nuts, seeds. In fact, studies that have been done around the world say that globally we eat too few nuts and seeds, too few fruits and vegetables in most cultures, not all, but most, and we eat too few whole grains in almost every culture around the world. And on average, we eat too much animal protein. Too
much animals, not enough just regular food, it sounds. The food that, human ancestors ate commonly, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Not to romanticize,
not to romanticize. And I'm not saying that we should never eat processed food. I'm just saying right now in the U.S., we're eating too much of it. And, we're the leaders in the obesity crisis. But, it's also a big problem in the UK and Australia as well.
Right, everywhere. And and growing in China and Asia, people have access. Taiwan is famous for boba, the pearl milk tea, and that's not the healthiest. That's a lot of sugar. That's a lot of processing.
Yeah.
So eating food can be bad for us and bad for the environment. What happens when we don't eat that food? What happens with food waste?
Yeah, so that's another issue because there's a lot of obviously embedded carbon, but also land and water in food that we waste. I mean, if you produce something and then you don't eat it, that's land that could maybe not have been deforested. That was water that could have been used for other purposes. And then obviously that food waste has to go somewhere,
Right.
So there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of just sheer wastage.
And is this food waste like I had lunch earlier and I'm used to smaller portion sizes, let's say in Asia, and I wasn't able to finish all my food. Is that what we're talking about for food waste, or is this kind of more of a systemic problem with food waste?
Well, in developed countries like the US, it tends to be largely the consumer. We tend to buy too much food and, it sits in our refrigerator and then we throw it out, or...
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, we're all guilty of that. Or, like you said, the portion size. Restaurants are responsible. A lot of times they give us, we assume that they're giving us a portion, but as you said, they gave you more than one portion because you couldn't finish it.
Maybe 3 people could have had what I was eating.
Yeah. So, one thing we can do is we can simply order smaller dishes if we know the place. But, most times you're going to a place you don't know it. You don't know how big the portions are. So it's hard for you as a consumer.
Is there some kind of economic incentive to just overload people with food? Because I guess the alternative is that people think that restaurant is not filling enough, right? It's better to have too much.
Well, the marginal cost of having a bigger serving is very little for the restaurant. So they can charge you a little bit more for a bigger serving. And then in theory, you're going to be happier, right?
Supersizing.
Yeah, supersizing. Okay. Yeah.
And so speaking about supersizing, maybe McDonald's, corporate brands, do corporate brands play into this? Are there any kind of tricks that they do? Like, I think earlier we were talking about cartoons.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not sure what it's like in Taiwan, but in the US, brands are allowed to advertise to children and they're allowed to advertise, in children's programming. So it's often difficult when you're watching children's programming to distinguish between the commercial and the programming because sometimes they embed the products in there. Then they market extremely aggressively to children. And McDonald's is famous for it, the Happy Meals, the toys.
Oh, yeah. I used to go to the Play Place, get the Happy Meal, get the toy. You have your whole collection. It's tied to the movie. And then, to this day, the smell of McDonald's gives me this kind of, almost a drug addict response, I feel like, to that smell.
Yeah.
That's all intentional. Basically.
Oh, it's very intentional. In fact, I kind of had an epiphany when my son, who's now 28, when he was like 3 years old, he was in preschool and I was picking him up. He didn't realize I was there. So I walked up behind him and he was talking to 2 of his buddies. And I did not take my child ever to fast food. But they were sitting there discussing what toys were available at what, Burger King and McDonald's. They had a whole market going. They knew exactly what toy was coming out every week from every place, even though I didn't take my son to these places.
Is there anything with labeling? So there's kind of restaurants, we know, McDonald's, Tony the Tiger, cereals, sugar, soda, that's obvious. But now there's, at least when I've come back to the US, I see a lot more organic food. Can we trust an organic label? Is that something that matters? Can we vote with our dollar for a better agricultural system?
So I think it depends on the country that you're in. Because, for example, in the United States, we have a USDA organic label, and it's illegal for you to use it if your food is not organic. You cannot call something organic unless it's organic certified. So even though you might be using organic practices, if you don't actually go through the certification, you can't call it organic. And people are fined. There are people who cheat. There's always people who cheat. But for the most part, it's very trustworthy.
And organic in this case means no pesticides?
No synthetic pesticides.
No synthetic pesticides. Okay.
And no sewage sludge.
I didn't even know that was a choice.
Yeah, and no GMOs.
Okay.
And also no antibiotics for the animals.
Okay. What about using human waste? Because I know in other countries...
That's what sewage sludge is.
Oh, that's just sewage. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So so if it's organic, you can't use it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be organic, though.
Yeah.
But okay.
Yeah.
I'll move away from poop. All right. Okay. So there's organic, and then there's also local foods.
Right.
I feel like I frequently have spirited conversations with people about the importance of local food. And my understanding is that local food is good, but it's not the ultimate thing. Just because you eat food that's nearby, it might not be the best.
Yeah. So first of all, what do you mean by local? Because this is something that really, and this is a rhetorical question, because obviously we're in Seattle. There are no local bananas, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
And coffee. Coffee's not local. It's not grown here, but this is the Starbucks nation, right? So where do you draw the line? And so different consumers have different feelings about what local means. If you're in Europe, local might mean a village. If you're in the United States, maybe a lot of people think about it maybe in terms of 100 miles. They often think of it in driving distance.
Yeah, that'd be really far, though. I mean,
Yeah.
because California would be multiple European countries if
Exactly.
if it was like that. So you could, California grown, but
Yeah.
it'd be like someone in Spain eating French food, maybe,
Yeah.
and still thinking it's local. And so is local always better, I guess, or is it?
Well, there's no certification. So, like I say, it can mean anything. And in some states, you can basically download a state seal and say, this is grown in state X.
Oh.
And in other places, they actually have some sort of standard, but they may not have inspectors. So it's a really sort of vague term. The only time you really know that it's really local is if you're buying directly from a farmer, you're buying at a farmer's market. Then presumably you can talk to the person and figure out where it's actually grown.
So I'm not quite sure how to word this, but are farmers markets good? I mean, because I feel like there's also this element of privilege involved with the farmers market. It's only certain times of the day, certain areas, certain communities. I went to school in Monterey, California, really amazing farmers market. But
Yeah.
I don't know if Salinas, where a lot of that food was grown, had a farmers market that people could go to.
Well, there's going to probably be equity issues because the farmers markets want to be where they're going to sell. So they want to be in the wealthier neighborhoods, right? So that's why you generally see them in those wealthier neighborhoods, because those people have the money to pay a little bit extra for those products. And many of those farmers are struggling. So, yes. And right now what's happening, it's particularly in the Bay Area, there's such a proliferation of farmers markets. I think there's over 80 in the Bay Area.
80 different farmers markets.
Yeah. And so the farmers obviously can't go to every single one, so they have to hire people to go to all of them. So it's getting to the point where there's so many markets that it's a big cost for farmers to get food in all of these markets. So it's actually becoming kind of a drawback to see another farmer's market because it just dilutes the base of people who are actually buying at them rather than increasing access.
Interesting. I know you've done research in other countries as well. Is the farmer's market like a U.S. specific thing? Because in Taiwan, we just have, and many other countries, we just have sort of the wet market.
Yeah.
In practice, it's the farmer's market, but they don't necessarily brand it that way. Is the farmer's market like a European thing as well?
Well, it depends. In some cases, yes. So a farmer's market in the U.S., in theory, the people selling are the actual producers. If you go to the Pike Place Market here in Seattle, that is not a farmer's market. That is actually vendors who are buying food and then reselling it. There may be a couple people who are actually selling their food, but clearly when they have a whole array of 50 different fruits and vegetables in January, this is not local
Something's
food.
wrong, yeah.
This is not local food. So most countries have those vendors. They're public markets, right, where they're purchasing food and reselling it. And then they may have a few actual farmers who are selling their food directly. And you know who those are because they generally have a very local, very limited offering of food.
All right, let's take a quick digestion break before we continue our conversation with Lydia Zepeda. After the break, we're going to talk about food delivery and the future of food. At the end of this episode, stay tuned. We're going to have a bonus question from the audience about food waste. Okay, let's get back to the interview.
Yeah.
I don't want this to sound like Nate comes back to America and asks questions, but I have seen a lot of food delivery, now in the U.S. Like Blue Apron frequently advertises on podcasts. Is that good? Is that going to help people make healthier choices, or is it just sort of a way of locking you into kind of this walled garden of food, basically, like the Netflix of food?
Yeah. So there's a couple different options here. One are meal kits, and Blue Apron, I think, is general meal kits. And meal kits are where you order so many meals per week, and you get a box, and in that box, it'll have everything you need to make these meals. Everything. including little salt packets and little oil packets and instructions about how to do this. They generally come with a lot of packaging, ice packs and all kinds of stuff. So the footprint of these is pretty intense. But some people use them as a way to either force themselves to cook or teach themselves to cook. So in the short term, I can see a rationale for doing this. In terms of convenience, quite honestly, if you know how to cook, it does, ordering a box of food, it seems to me almost more work.
Right. But
Yeah.
it seems like there might be some kind of food waste element there, right? Because it's kind of portioned out for you.
Yeah, and I saw one study that claimed that these boxes actually had a better ecological footprint. But the way they did that was they were comparing these meal kits with going to the store each time to buy those exact ingredients, which of course didn't make sense because you don't go to the store 3 times a day every day.
Right. I mean, you might, but there's probably some other issues at play there.
Yeah. I mean, you go to the store, you buy bulk, and you make multiple meals out of the food that you buy.
Right. And you have leftovers, and it kind of goes on.
Yeah. And you're feeding multiple people. So anyway.
So there's another type of meal delivery service.
So I guess there's 3 kinds,
Okay.
because there's the meal delivery, and then there's the grocery delivery, which is essentially like an online CSA, community-supported agriculture. You can be buying from a farm or a consortium of farmers directly, and you select what you want. They deliver it weekly. Or you can be buying from a grocery store, and they deliver it. I don't know that anybody's really done a really good systematic study on this, but it's possible that you could actually reduce the footprint simply by having enough density and delivery of these foods rather than having every individual go and drive to a grocery store and buy them and pick them up and take them home.
Okay. Let's jump into the future, because
Sure.
this whole conference is about imagining the future Earth. So, you've been researching food for
Long time.
a decent amount of time. Okay, decent amount of time. Where do you see the trajectory of food going? What is kind of the future of food and the future of human relationships with food? What's food going to look like in the next maybe just 10 years?
Well, so I think that, globally, we're seeing a lot more countries trying to adopt sort of the U.S. diet, the more processed foods, the more meats. And this,
God.
yeah, I know. And this is not looking good for people's health nor for the planet. On the other hand, it sounds really bad for us to say, oh, well, you shouldn't do what we did.
Do as I say, not do as I do.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that we have some really big issues that public health officials and public policymakers are going to have to make some decisions. And we're already seeing it in terms of like sugar taxes. I think there's like over 60 countries that have sugar taxes on soda. And they work in some countries and they don't work in others, like in Mexico. The sugar tax has reduced the amount of soda. And in fact, if you look at children globally, more children globally have soda every day than they have fruit.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, in some countries, if the tax is big enough, it has been a deterrent. People argue that this is regressive because, it's oftentimes poor people who are buying these. They spend a larger proportion of their income on food. But the fact of the matter is those foods are not good for them or their kids. So
there was a former mayor who's running for president who was quite controversial for his soda tax. Is that sort of a real outrage? Or we had another talk during AAAS about climate denial and sort of this manufactured ideas about opposing, potentially socially positive policy. So does this feel like a good faith argument to be kind of against soda taxes or sugar taxes?
Well, I mean, I think that's an argument that people use because they don't want people to judge them and they don't want people to tell them. But the facts are pretty clear that sugar is not healthy for you. And the public health problems are a cost. And so we really do want to deter people. Also, many of those people with those health problems, we have to pay for their health care, especially if they're poor, they're on Medicaid in the United States. Those are imposing costs on your healthcare system.
That'd be interesting. I wonder if there's some relationship with sugar tax and kind of having universal health care.
There's definitely a very strong public health incentive to try to have better health and to have preventative health measures.
You have the fundamentals in place.
Yeah.
What about the way food is made itself? Because the U.S., highly industrialized agriculture production, my understanding is very low workforce employment compared to other countries. How do you see that changing in the next 10 years?
Yeah, right now, I think it's 93%, I think, of the U.S. agricultural land is dedicated to livestock and their feed. So
Wow.
and most of the rest is dedicated to just wheat and rice. And so there's very little land that's actually dedicated to like fruits and vegetables and everything else, lentils, and et cetera. So I don't see policies changing in the near future in this country. And I mean, that is troubling because I think that we are sort of running into problems also with soil erosion and soil fertility. And I'm not terribly concerned about running out of food because we have so much of it and we're so wasteful with it. I think we can be a little bit more conservative in terms of how we deal with food and make some marginal changes. And I think that's where we really need to start making marginal, easy changes like the Meatless Monday or the, I'm not going to have dessert today type of changes, just to start moving us in the right direction.
Just move the needle. Because
Yeah.
you mentioned we'll be able to feed people. And
Yeah.
I hear a lot of conversation about there's going to be 10 billion people in the future. By 2050, I think it's 9 billion, 10 billion people.
Yeah, 10 billion is...
In order to feed all these people, we have to do X. And it's either indoor farming or it's GMOs or it's some sort of technological solution. In your experience, how valid is that?
I heard this all the time for decades, 3 decades now, people saying, oh, we're going to run out of food, we're going to run out of food. No, food will just become more expensive. That is what will happen. It will become more expensive and we will change how we eat because certain things will become more expensive. We will change what we grow. We're not just going to run out of food one day. That doesn't just happen overnight. Yeah.
Whew,
yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about
You
that.
don't have to worry about that particular issue.
No. Yeah.
Okay. Any other changes? What about lab-grown meat? Do you know anything about kind of these synthetic foods that are coming down?
No, I don't, but I find it really fascinating. And one of my colleagues was talking about like these new chicken nuggets that are coming out where they're mixing vegetable protein in with chicken and actual like carrots and things. And he's saying, kids are going to eat these anyway, so at least try to make them a little healthier. So that's another sort of marginal sort of stepwise thing of taking food that people are already eating and just making it a little more healthy. Like the fact that we've got trans fats out of the food system. That's a real success.
Oh, really? I guess I'm kind of ignorant. What was so bad about trans fats?
They are linked with cardiovascular disease. So
Okay.
yeah.
So just straight up banning those is the way to go.
Yeah.
Are there any other substances that aren't banned yet that we maybe should be thinking about banning?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
I work with plastics, so I'm really into banning certain types of plastics. So I wonder if it also fits with food.
Well, depending on who you talk to, you're going to find people who would definitely want to see differences in how we raise animals and slaughter animals. And I think that there's certain practices, like the fact that we put so many chemicals on the land and we don't have a way of really recovering the cost of that because it creates really a lot of downstream costs. So I don't know if banning, but more regulation perhaps. Yeah.
More regulation.
Yeah.
And you're talking downstream effects. You're talking about like dead zones,
Exactly. Fisheries
areas
that
lacking oxygen.
Yeah. And then, water quality of water that people are using.
Okay. So I guess one other area to sort of maybe touch on last would be, what do we do? How if you're like a normal consumer, what can you do? You're talking about systemic things that we need to change. It's probably going to take some larger radical change, some political capacity that, at least in the US, we might not have right now.
Yeah.
What's something that we can kind of do as a community, as an individual?
Honestly, I think the best thing anybody can do is learn how to cook.
Learn how to cook for yourself.
Learn how to cook for yourself. And because honestly, it is actually quicker once you learn how to do it than it is to go out or it is to, order food. It's really not that hard. There's so many self-help, do it yourself. And it's a way of really controlling your expenses as well. So it's financially beneficial, it's health-wise beneficial, environmentally beneficial, you name it. So learn to cook.
Okay. As someone who doesn't cook enough for myself, I will take that tip personally in a good way.
Okay.
Anything else that you want to add about any topic that you brought up maybe earlier during AAAS or that you want people to know?
Well, I do want people to realize that they shouldn't be so hard on themselves because honestly, we're bombarded with advertisement. And if you walk into a store, a grocery store, you are also bombarded with a lot of very unhealthy foods. So, we have all these influences on us. We have a food system that's basically an unhealthy food system for a large portion of the food that we produce. So we need to realize that in making decisions, that's a big obstacle for us. We can't just remove ourselves from the food system. So,
Right. We go to the grocery store, you're going to get what's there.
Right.
I mean, that's what we try and say with the show. We flew here from Taiwan. We're an environmental podcast. I don't feel guilty about flying because I'm not sure what else I could do. I don't think we would have the same discussion if this was through a webinar. And I do kind of wonder if people just end up feeling bad for themselves.
Yeah.
This kind of climate anxiety and food anxiety and maybe even climate food anxiety jointly bound.
Yeah, no, and for goodness sakes, enjoy your food. And you'll eat healthy, you'll eat better if you know what you're cooking and how, what you're eating.
Agree. Okay. I feel like we've covered most of the questions that I thought up, and I learned a lot more about food that I actually realized. And I learned that trans fats are bad, and that I should probably be cooking for myself, and that I shouldn't feel too bad, and that sugar is insane. So thank you so much, Dr. Zepeda, for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, and now on to our audience question from Pete. What's your question, Pete? Plays tape.
Hey, Nick. Greetings from Cambodia. I have a what is least worse kind of question. Energy recovery of an organic material or composting that material into fertilizer. Both replace fossil fuels, obviously, but I believe are similar greenhouse gas emissions by themselves. To me, composting seems more circular, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Okay, let's unpack that question first for people who might not be familiar with what composting or biogas is. Essentially, what Pete is asking about is, what do we do with food and agriculture waste? What do we do with it once it starts to decompose? Biogas, or energy reclamation, is burning or is digesting agriculture and food waste and turning it into a form of energy, either through combustion or through harvesting methane, natural gas, from the decomposition of that organic waste. The other option is to compost it. Now, composting is something I hope you're all familiar with. It's how you make soil. It's decomposing organic matter and turning it back into soil, into the ground. Pete is asking, which one is better for the environment? Both. I think it's hard to say whether or not one or the other is absolutely better. Rather, they are both beneficial in different contexts and under different circumstances. For you as an individual, composting is something that you can do at home. Even if you live in an apartment, you can have worm composting. You can have a compost bin in your kitchen. If you have a larger house, you can do hot composting and have a compost pile. There are resources online. If you are a company or a city, you can also compost. The problem with composting for some is that what do you do with the soil? What do you do with the organic matter once you have composted it? If you are at home, you can use it in your garden. You may not have a garden if you're in an apartment. Or if you're a company, you may have so much compost you cannot find a proper way to redistribute it. Maybe you don't yet have a connection to a farm or an agricultural community. The problem is, unfortunately, that artificial fertilizer is very cheap, and as is buying soil. So in some cases, it might not be economic for a business to compost their waste. In these cases, or if you have waste that is very difficult to compost, such as post-consumer organic waste, which is another way of saying food waste, you can turn to biogas or bioenergy to reclaim the energy from that food waste. It's very difficult to make food waste out of oily foods, or if it's high in meat content, or if it's commingled with compostable plastics or compostable packaging such as paper. In those cases, it might be better to use an anaerobic digester. An anaerobic digester is a type of machine that breaks down organic waste and captures the methane that is emitted from that digestion breakdown process of that food. You then capture that and you burn that for energy. And what we're seeing on a city level, at least in the US and in some other parts of the world, is the development of municipal biogas or municipal bioenergy, where they take food waste from the city and use that and collect that energy to displace natural gas or other types of fossil fuel energy emissions. So I would say they're not an either or, they're a context-specific tool, and in fact, both are necessary. If you find someone who says that one is far superior to the other, you should be skeptical because there is a diversity of environmental solutions for food waste. It is not going to be a one above all approach. We have solar, we have wind, we have geothermal. Likewise for food waste, we have composting, we have biogas, we have biochar. There are many different solutions available and we should consider all of them. Thank you for your question. I'm Nature Nate, and this has been the Waste Not, Why Not podcast. Today's interview was recorded at the 2020 AAAS Annual Meeting on the SciMike stage, presented by This Study Shows by Wiley. Do you have a question for us? Email us at ask@wastenotwhynot.com. Give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. Become a monthly Patreon supporter on Patreon. Subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. We are Waste Not Why Not on Patreon and Substack, and Waste Not Pod on Twitter. This has been a Ghost Island Media production based in Taiwan. This episode was produced by Emily Y. Wu and myself, Nature Nate, edited by Yu-Chen Lai, brand design by Thomas Lee. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Side note, I love Cambodia. I used to do research there.
For fish.
For fish.